I specifically wanted to point out this tour, this LID tour. If you download this tour book right here, this PDF, I think I was, it's not in here right now. I was mentioning this generator. That's a 24-page book that goes into more detail about some of the LID techniques we have on campus. We actually have a tour map, which only does you good if you're there, because it's a regular tour map. But we also have an interactive map of LID on campus. And this interactive map, if you click on that, it'll actually pull up our campus. You can download the tour book again. That's a 24-page PDF book that talks about LID. Each one of these pins is one of our techniques. And if you click on it, you're going to get a video. And so that's the virtual tour. Okay? So this is our signage. So what comes up is the signage, and because I'm projecting this right now, it's not exactly it's not perfectly fitting here. But that's the signage for the riparian buffer zone. We have 7 different techniques on campus. And so then there's a video associated with the techniques.
Behind me is something you don't see every day. We're doing a prescribed burn or a controlled burn on a native grow zone. So we've intentionally set part of our campus on fire. Now this fire is part of a native rejuvenation project. So behind us is our native grow zone. It's about 30 different native plant species that are there to provide habitat for insects and bugs, as well as providing water quality benefits. These deep-rooted native species are really good at cleaning stormwater runoff before it flows into the Rouge River. So why do a controlled burn? Why set this on fire? Well, as part of the natural evolution of things, these plants were used to having prairie wildfires. They were used to being burned by Mother Nature every 3-5 years or so. Well, in modern society, what we do is we suppress fire. We don't set things on fire. We don't burn things. Well, because of that, these plants don't get the rejuvenating properties that they're used to. In addition, it allows for a lot more invasive species to come onto our campus. Things like Phragmites and things we don't want here. So by doing the prescribed burn in a controlled environment such as this, we can rejuvenate those native plants, provide habitat, provide water quality benefits, and suppress the invasive species like the Phragmites that we don't want here. So yes, you don't see our campus on fire every day, but it's for a good cause. Thank you.
I don't know how much it's catching on around here, but like Washington County, there's several companies that make a living just doing prescribed burns. And there's some of the large industry out there that has big areas that they've converted to natural prairies. Toyota and stuff like that, they do prescribed burns. So prescribed burns are becoming a very acceptable way of controlling invasive species. And the thing is, once you burn these plants, they actually come back stronger. I mean, so we did that burn in 2002. 2014, this thing was, it was good in 13 as well, but 2014, it looked amazing. I mean, you burn it and it looks better. I mean, actually, the flowers, what comes back the next year is amazing. And it gets the roots to go deeper. I mean, it's a really good way of rejuvenating the soil, keeping the non-natives out, getting the flowers to really pop. So again, you've got the tour. Each one of these is a site specific, and then there's that, again, that's that book. If you click on that, you're going to get a 24-page booklet that talks about LID, talks about our watershed, and not on a technical level. It's really more of a public ed level, but it'll go through at a kind of a public education level, these different techniques. All right, maintenance and economics. So one of the, obviously one of the issues here, right, is Ralph and I could do a whole day on maintenance, a whole day on this, a whole day on that. So we're trying to give you a little flavor of everything. This really probably could have been in the first presentation Ralph did, which is the sustainable cities concept, right? It's a 10 trillion gallon per year problem. When you look across the entire United States, it's a 10 trillion gallon per year problem. And right now, surface water runoff is really our largest waterproofing. And the Clean Water Act passed in the 1970s. We've done a great job with industrial and wastewater. So stormwater runoff, that is our big water problem, water issue, or water quality issue now. So cities are starting to focus more on green infrastructure, low impact development to tackle this problem. Okay, so that luckily we're starting to find out more about it. Down by us, CSOs are a huge deal. We need $63 billion to fix combined sewers. Not going to spend a lot of time on that because it's not as big a deal. As I mentioned, Kansas City, New York, they're finding out that LID is more effective than building yet another wastewater treatment plant or another giant pipe hole in the ground. So Philadelphia, Portland, Seattle, New York, these are national cities with significant green infrastructure implementation plans. In the Midwest, Milwaukee, Cleveland, Detroit, and Cincinnati are really moving forward on green infrastructure implementation plans. And up here, Traverse City and Grayling have spent some time, energy, resources, and money on green infrastructure to deal with water quality issues associated with stormwater. And so what about the cost? Well, that's a big issue, is cost. Luckily, we're starting to get a larger body of knowledge. I'm just going to give you some literature that you can start referring to and looking at. So the US EPA came out with a report in 2007. I know it's getting a little old at this point, but things are only getting better. They only looked at capital costs, not operation and maintenance costs, just capital costs. And what they found was anywhere from a 15% to 80% reduction in capital costs for green when compared to gray, or traditional infrastructure. There are 20 case studies in this. I'm just going to show you one just so you get a feel for the type of information that's in this book, for those of you who haven't seen it yet. So this case study is Somerset subdivision. It's Prince George's County, Maryland, but it's cases from across the entire U.S. That is how much it was going to cost traditionally, $2.5 million. They did an LID plan for $1.6 million, which was obviously $800,000 cost savings, or about $4,000 per lot cost savings. But there's a few other tidbits in here that I think are worth pointing out. Okay, so one is by doing an LID design. Right down here, they got 6 additional lots, so they saved $4,000 per lot. Then they got 6 more lots to sell because they didn't have a big hole in the ground, and they didn't have all the infrastructure associated with the pipes. So they got more lots to sell, and they saved money. The other thing, and I don't think it's in this one. No, it doesn't say it in this one. Here's the other thing that I thought was real interesting about this one is this particular subdivision here. Half of the lot was using LID, the other half was conventional storm and curb and gutter. So they had 80 acres, 40 acres traditional, 40 acres LID. Same school system, same municipality, same services, so it's a true side-by-side, right? And what they found was that the lots in the LID side sold faster and at a premium. So basically people wanted to live in that environment than the other environment. And one of the things that I've talked to a few of you side by side is there is a growing population that this is the lifestyle that they want. They want green infrastructure. They want these types of more ecosystem amenities, biking, trails, gardens. I mean, it's a growing demand. I was doing I don't think I told everybody the story about Royal Oak and the City Council. I just said that to a couple people, I think, at our table. But basically, I was at a city council meeting, and I gave a talk about green infrastructure, and then the city engineer came up and gave a talk, basically negating everything I said. You know, this is full of crap, you know, it doesn't work, it costs too much, and all this stuff. And it's going to cost our taxpayers too much money. And I kind of countered, it was kind of a back and forth a little bit. But finally, he just said, well, our people won't pay for this. And there's about 60 people in the room. One older gentleman slowly raised his hand. The engineer called on him. And he said, have you ever asked your people what they're willing to pay for? Because well, I just know they won't pay for this. And he said, how many people in this room are willing to pay a little extra for green infrastructure instead of the traditional stuff that he, and he's pointing to the city engineer, is selling? Almost every hand in the room went up. The Clean River Watershed Council, again, down by me, they did a study about ecosystem services, clean water, parks, rivers, recreation. And they found that everybody was willing to basically spend between $10 to $20 more per person in taxes for these green stormwater services. There's a perception, now, everyone thinks, so there's perception versus reality, right? So there's a perception that nobody's willing to pay for this stuff. Okay? Now I'm going to show you a lot of data that shows this stuff is cheaper. That said, there's research that shows that people are willing to spend a little more for something they see value in. All right? And it may only be $10 per household, which I know that's a big burden on a lot of people. I'm not suggesting it's not. But when you look at the entire Watershed Council, $10 per household, and they had 80,000 households, can you imagine how much work you can do with that? And it was because it was a dedicated funding. That's the key. If people know it's dedicated to something that they want to use it for, they're going to pay for it. As long as they know it can't get siphoned off and spent somewhere else, because we don't trust those elected officials.
You just can't let it go.
No, I can't. So this is the a whole suite of projects, right? So this is the capital conventional cost. This is the LID cost. This is the savings where they got, right? There's one that was negative. This is Kensington Estates, and you can read on all of them. This one was a lot more expensive to put all the bells and whistles that they did in there. So. But it's 15, 20, 25, a whole variety of costs. I'm going to come back to that. So you can look that up. So how did the US EPA find money savings? Well, there's less site preparation, less grading, less paving, less infrastructure. And then they were doing expensive landscaping after the fact. And by doing it this way, they didn't have to have as much landscaping. By conserving and using natives, they weren't bringing in giant trees and all the other things we talked about. They did not measure the additional cost, the reduction of maintenance costs or additional benefits. That EPA study was purely capital cost. Okay. What about maintenance cost savings? Well, what we're finding is that there are lower long-term life cycle costs associated with stuff. I already spent a lot of time talking about the lower life cycle costs associated with green roofs. But they're finding that turf grass versus prairie grass, longer low-term maintenance costs. So the 2 acres on my campus that we converted to turf grass, we mow it once a year now, and it was being mowed, it was being fertilized, so my campus facilities people love it. I took 2 acres that they don't have to maintain. They love it, right? So, yeah, we burned it once every 3 to 5 years we burn it. So that was another great story, right? So we had in 2012, it had been about 5 years, and so it was about time for a burn. So I called my vice president of finance. I said, I got this idea. I want to burn our native prairie on campus, set it on fire. Her response to me was, how much is that going to cost? Not, is that a good idea? Not, you want to do what? You want to burn our campus? Her first thing out of her mouth was, what's that going to cost? So it was a few $100. I mean, I'm not going to deny it. We spent, I'm trying to remember what it cost. I think we spent like $700, and that included the permit. Like the city of Southfield was like, we don't do this, so they actually charged us a pretty hefty permit, which I thought was a little unnecessary. But we had like $300 permit because they had to have a fire truck come out and watch us set it on fire. So, oh well. We already talked about better performance, vegetation. Once established, it's just routine maintenance. Okay. What are some of the? We're going to come back to maintenance in a little bit. What are some of the other economics of LID? More economical than gray systems, I've already covered that. Less capital costs, less maintenance costs. It can actually be both, right? So what are some of the additional benefits, right? So this is operation and maintenance. This is coming out of New York City. So I'll try to go through this pretty quickly, but they looked at green versus gray. All right, and this is operation and maintenance costs of the New York City strategy. So what they found is early on, you've got, and this is, if you Google New York City Green Infrastructure Plan, you'll get this. You'll get the whole report. They've got a really nice report. But what they looked at is, okay, this is salary, fringe. This is the contractual supplies and landscaping. So this is what it was going to cost them in maintaining green infrastructure versus gray infrastructure. As time went on, they had to use more electricity and natural gas because of pumps and because of other things. So a lot of their gray infrastructure have large-scale pumps that they need to retrofit. So they try to do a big picture look at this stuff. This wasn't New York City saying, hey, let's justify green infrastructure. It was New York City saying, we got flooding problems, we got water problems. Let's take a really holistic look at this. And what they found was, yeah, it's going to take them a while, but long term, they started saving money. They're starting to see, and this is in thousands of dollars, so it doesn't look like a big savings, but that's a couple $100,000. So what they found is long term, and this is annual. So from after about 15 years, they're saving $200,000 annually. So green infrastructure maintenance requirements, O&M, was more expensive for about the first 15 years. From then on, it was going to save them more in operation and maintenance. So that's kind of the big picture. And so when they looked at it over 30 years, it was better to do green than gray. I'll just kind of leave it at that. This just came out of the Great Lakes Protection Fund last year. It was done by ECT, and it's a business framework, right? So one of the things we've already talked about, in some regards, we were talking about codes, right? And if things are in code, then they have to do them. Well, as Ralph pointed out, one of the problems with code, we could write green infrastructure into our codes, But codes then become very rigid. And sometimes what we want to do is avoid rigid, right? We want some innovation, we want some flexibility. So, and the other thing is, sometimes you want to incentivize this stuff without the stick, right? If you put something in code, there some people are going to stand up and say, don't tell me what to do, right? And so this was about financing. Is there a business model for green infrastructure? Can we sell it based on economics? And what they found is, yeah, they actually they can. And so they started looking at, okay, green infrastructure strategies, cost, loading ratio. So what this loading ratio means is, so a green roof, typically water comes out of the sky and hits the green roof, meaning it's a 1-to-1 loading ratio. A rain garden has a 12-to-1 loading ratio, means you get 12 square feet of parking lot to 1 square foot of rain garden. So a rain garden has a really high loading ratio, so does bioswale. All right? Porous pavement is about 4-to-1 because you can have 1 porous pavement parking stall and 3 non-pavement. I was actually staying at a hotel a couple months ago, and what they did, they had a big parking lot. The corner stall in all 4 corners of the parking lot was porous, and everything just sloped to those 4 corners, and that's all they really needed. So it's amazing. You don't need a ton. Sometimes you just need a little bit to help you out there. And then cisterns. Again, you can read the whole report, but this is cost per annual gallon captured, right? So rain gardens, native landscaping, rain barrels, soil amendments, all these things are cheap for annual gallon captured. If you remember, I showed you that I try to say like $1 per gallon of stormwater, but that was in perpetuity. This is per year. That's why when mine come up to like $1 or $2, I'm looking at over 20 years. This is per year. So obviously green roofs are really expensive. That's why I said you'll never do a green roof for stormwater. You'll do a green roof for all those other benefits, and they also have a great stormwater benefit. So porous pavement is not a cheap way to go. So just trying to level the playing field a little bit. Okay. So this was in that report. It actually came out of the Metropolitan Milwaukee Sewer District. This is came out of California. This is 2013, so this is not too old as well. This is looking at installation and 20 years of operation and maintenance. All right, and they're looking at, they broke it into offices, residential, mixed urban, and big box. So the big box retailers. And what it costs to do these different techniques. And same thing then, using infiltration-based techniques and irrigation, that's your lower hanging fruit. This is it's a little offset here, but this is $1 per gallon of stormwater over 20 years. So that's why I'm trying to explain apples to apples, right? This is per year. This is looking at it per 20 years. So that's why on one chart it says like 25 cents, and the other chart it says $4, because I'm trying to get it to apples here. But you can see here, green roofs are going to come from a water point of view. Green roofs are really expensive. However, for big box, it comes down, right? I mean, big box can start saving some of their money on that. Okay. So again, just trying to show the cost. What does it cost, and how much is it going to help you? Okay. And then in the same article, then they compare it to traditional, and they show over 20 years it's cheaper than traditional. So how do you start doing some planning? Well, the WERF, Water Environmental Research Foundation, they put together a spreadsheet tool for LID selection, both in capital and life cycle costs. This is a great tool. I know Ralph says he never puts links in because they change, but if you Google WERF BMP tool, you'll get this tool to come up. They have spreadsheets for cisterns, bioretention, green roofs, planter vaults, permeable pavement, rain gardens, retention ponds. And the spreadsheet is set up based on national published data. So if you're just doing it for planning, you can enter in, I've got 800 feet of permeable pavement, and it'll tell you, here's how much it's going to cost to install, and here's how much it's going to cost over 20 years of operation and maintenance. Okay? You can update this, it's an unlocked spreadsheet. So it's not, and so you can update it for, if you know, well, locally, this stuff costs $2 per square foot instead of $5 per square foot, you can start building that in. So planners, engineers, architects can start customizing this for their local costs and use it as a selling tool. Okay. So I talked a little bit about this in the third session. We talked about planning, but we did the same thing. So how do we use these LID economic tools for community support? So the Clinton River Watershed Council, we did the exact same thing with them, right? So we went into the village of Clarkston. Last time I showed you Clinton Township, so I'm at least going to show you different slides. The Clinton Township one was more about master planning their campus. This one's about retrofitting it downtown. So we went into the village, and we just identified places to retrofit. So the Clinton River Watershed Council, the local watershed organization, basically, and I guess this is kind of a comment for Jen or whoever else, what they did is they did this as a service to their member communities. And basically we do site walks, and we look for good places for retrofits. So we're looking for, here's a parking lot. The way it's striped, nobody can ever park in this corner. It's useless space. And you can see that's where the water's ponding anyway. So you got asphalt, nobody parks here, and it's useless space. They were mowing all the way down to the water's edge. And in fact, you can see like tire tracks in the water. They're mowing the lily pads. So here you got a lot of site soil erosion from this curb cut. So for the trained eye or the untrained eye, we went through and said, oh, hey, here's what you can do. Right? You can cut out that asphalt and put in a rain garden. All right? You can convert some of your parking lot to porous pavement. You can put in a bioswale. I don't include on here. You can also put in a riparian buffer zone. And we use those tools to put a cost associated with every one of them. And that cost that we picked, we basically used a high-end everything. We basically said, we're assuming that you are going to do none of this work, that you're going to hire it all out. If your people, your DPW staff, or volunteers do the work, these costs are going to come way down. All right? So we were giving them basically the high-end estimates on everything. And that's the other thing that spreadsheet will do for you. It allows you to put in ranges of values. So here's an existing alley. They are still direct connect. Their rooftop runoffs are going straight to the river. Okay, in this entire alley, everything was direct connect. So we said, and so this is another great example of green infrastructure. That parking lot is up here. The park is over here. Pedestrians use this alley all the time. Strollers, kids on bikes. It's also the trash dumpster and the delivery alley. So you get a lot of conflict in this alley. So we basically went in and said, well, let's identify where the trucks are going to move. Let's put in a pedestrian walkway. We put in planter boxes along every business. So all these businesses now don't have direct connect stormwater. And we're going to put in the concrete paver blocks all throughout this alley. Okay? Basically 100% reduction of stormwater. All right? It's expensive, $80,000, $43,000. However, there are grants at the state level for these types of retrofits. Okay? And we eliminated, and so when we started talking to these businesses, they loved it. Right? This right here is a beauty salon. This is a law office. This was a vegetable market. And they want foot traffic to come through here. So they loved it. Okay. I'm not going to show you all of the sites. I just showed you two, site 1 and site 2. But what we did, though, it's the same concept. We set up this smorgasbord, right? Little column A, little column B, tied $1 per gallon for improvements with it, gave them suggestions for funding. And now the Watershed Council is working with these communities to write grants to pay for stormwater improvements, or to go at a SAW grant from the state. So it's a way of prioritizing. Okay, so we're using some of these economic modeling tools and the curve number approach to start prioritizing. So when you look at this, there's actually 3 things going on here. One is the curve number approach for stormwater management, so that's engineering. 2, the economics, the dollars, and then 3, the human element and the aesthetic element. And we tied all 3 together for this project to try to sell it. So you're looking at the emotional side, the dollar side, and the stormwater side. Okay. All right, so I've hinted a few times, what about additional commercial and economic benefits for this stuff, right? So the triple bottom line, right? The triple bottom line of sustainability, it's got to be socially sustainable, economically sustainable, and environmentally sustainable. That's what we're really trying to focus on. If it's environmentally sustainable and people hate it, it's not sustainable, right? If it costs too much and you can't pay for it, it's not sustainable. So we are looking at the triple bottom line effect. People that have implemented green infrastructure at a commercial scale have found increased property values and increased rents. You can charge more for your tenants if you have green infrastructure at your facility. They've actually found increased retail sales. Okay, putting in a planter box and having a bench brings people inside. They're actually seeing more retail sales when you've greened up your commercial space. Okay, especially in strip malls. People are kind of getting pretty tired of these massive strip malls of asphalt. That's not
Shopping trends are actually getting away from that when you look at the data. Okay? Energy savings. Green infrastructure saves energy. And it saves cost. Green infrastructure, you're not watering as much. You're not fertilizing as much. Depending upon, you're not heating and cooling as much. Like I talked about those living walls. A lot of that's evaporative cooling. So you actually are cooling your buildings off through shading. Okay, so there's actually energy savings associated with this. Reduced infrastructure costs, reduced water bills. So we've talked a lot about cities, but individual commercial developments are also saving on this stuff. Okay? Costs associated, cumulatively, you don't have as much flooding costs because you don't have as many floods. That's a longer term benefit down the way. Okay? So I've showed you a little bit of literature, a little bit of background. I know we've only got about 20 minutes left. The point is that there is an increasing body of work, both in the Midwest and across the nation, that's justifying the economics of this stuff. Okay? Sometimes it's as simple as trying to get it in the hands of your clients. Sometimes it's going to be a harder sell. So the communities I said we're working with downstate, it's kind of that give and take. We're trying to slowly sell them on these ideas, these pilot projects. So I showed you Clinton Township. I showed you Clarkston. Clinton Township already put in a rain garden from the Eagle Scout project as well as a cistern. Clarkston is they redid a bridge in a riparian buffer zone, and the last one, Rochester, put in a permeable pavement pathway. So basically, what happened with so this is great. What happened with Rochester is they basically, the day we presented that, somebody in the council made a motion that they set aside 15,000. I think it was 15,000. It's marginal, but they basically immediately voted to set aside $15,000 a year to slowly make green infrastructure improvements in their downtown core, passed unanimously. It's small, but it was a real step, right? It was a real step for them to say, you know what? We are going to they immediately said $15,000 a year for green infrastructure improvements in our downtown core for the benefit of our business community, right? That's how they sold it. So they started putting these things together. So the point is, 1 year after, these things are getting implemented. So I'm really happy. We're really pleased about that. So what about maintenance? All right. Must be continuous. You got to pay attention both during and after construction. So maintenance is one of the biggest reasons these things fail. What are some of the maintenance issues during construction? Make sure the contractor is responsible for what they're doing. They need to make sure they understand low impact development, green infrastructure, the site development. We had a case at Grand Valley State where they were putting a porous pavement parking lot. Then the landscaping contractor came and dumped mulch on the parking lot. Choked it right up. First thing they had to do was move the mulch and vacuum suck it all out. But we always dump it on the parking lot. They didn't. They just dumped it right on the parking lot. So you got to be careful. You got to make sure that the engineer who designed this stuff is inspecting it, informing people of expectations. Hey, this is going to be a rain garden. Don't stockpile your stuff there and compact my soil. Okay? So sediment erosion control becomes important. A lot of times you want to look at this stuff during and after rain events, early on in the process. How did it respond to a first rain event or a big rain event? Okay. What about long term? So like this, because the LID is kind of open, right? You don't just pour the concrete and it cures. That's why I mean, like you're kind of, as the project's going along, taking a look at this stuff, look at the erosion sediment control. The big thing then is after construction. Let's talk about the long-term maintenance. Who's responsible, right? Well, one possibility is the owner's responsible. There are maintenance agreements that can be written into place. I've already kind of mentioned those, right? That whoever owns the land signs a maintenance agreement that if they don't do it, they're going to be legally responsible and they'll get a bill. The city will do it and send them a bill. So it can be the landowner. It can be watershed groups. Honestly, so a lot of the rain gardens we've done in Southeast Michigan, when the DPW, when the city had responsibility for maintenance, that's when it was worst, right? I mean, it never was really in their higher priority list. And so the best rain gardens, the most well-performing, maintained ones, were those that were being maintained by watershed groups, gardening groups, business organizations, DDA. When it was the job of the city to maintain them, they didn't perform as well. And this is based on research that I did, infiltration research. We did inspections. Basically, the city put them in and then they walked away from them, which is exactly what they're not telling their clients to do, right? So you got to be careful. Sometimes when it falls under the responsibility of the municipality, it doesn't always work. I already mentioned the maintenance agreement. Have a maintenance agreement signed. if you want long-term credit, so as part of a stormwater plan, right? If I've got a stormwater plan, and in that stormwater plan, my rain garden is part of the water I'm keeping out of the storm sewer system, then I have to have some sort of agreement in place to maintain it and making sure it functions. Otherwise, it's not going to work for when we do have those rain events 10, 15 years from now. All right, you know I'm a stormwater nerd when I have my favorite maintenance manual. Okay, those words will probably never come out of any of your mouths. Oh, I have a favorite maintenance manual. My favorite maintenance manual is out of Seattle Public Utilities, SPEW. SPEW, they have it's called the Natural Drainage System Maintenance Manual, right? So, we talk about low impact development, green infrastructure, conservation design. In Seattle, they call it natural drainage systems. They got a great maintenance manual, and I would say this is a great place to start, and then you modify it. I'm going to explain to you why it's great. Okay? So, they first break everything into different categories. So category 1 is landscape and vegetation. And I'll show you what these other categories are. Right? And I'll email this to you, and you can Google it so you don't have to try to get this all down. They do service effort, A through D. Excellent effort is all of these things. So it's basically a checklist. It's a metric, right? Are there no bare spots? Is the plant palette working? Do I have at least 95% survival of my plants? Are there no or very few weeds? Is it clean? Does it look good? Is the mulch evenly distributed and no more than 4 inches? Right? I mean, they have, this is their checklist. And in addition to that, they provide pictures. So the person who's doing the checklist can come out there and go, that's what excellent should look like. That's what good should look like. That's moderate. This is what crappy looks like, right? So they have level A through D, right? And so they do send out people to inspect this. These are rain gardens and bioswales and natural drainage features in the right-of-way whose maintenance falls under somebody. And it could be a homeowner association, it could be a commercial association, or it could be them. But they're paying someone to check their own work, to go around and hold themselves accountable. Well, so the thing I like about this, right, is if you have something like a rain garden or a planter box in a downtown area, highly visible, you probably want that to be an A, right? If you've got a rain garden or a riparian buffer zone buried in the back of a park, and it's still providing all the stormwater benefits you want it to, but it doesn't have to look as pretty, maybe that's okay if it's a C, right? And this doesn't tell you you must do all these things every 6 weeks. It tells you if you want it to be an A and it gets to a C, then you do your maintenance. So it's a gradation scale. You don't automatically do maintenance. You do maintenance when you need to go up a level. So if you have a C level that falls to a D, then you do your maintenance. If you need something to be an A and it falls to a B or a C, then you do your maintenance. So I think it's a lot better than just once a year do X. Okay? All right, so what about stormwater system, right? This is part of a stormwater master plan. It's got to work from a stormwater point of view. So here's bioretention, bioinfiltration. Same concept. They're going through. If we get down to a level C, erosion, scouring, sedimentation, bare spots, it's no longer providing the stormwater function we want. Then we got to maintain it and get it up to an A. And that can be done through rototilling. It can be done from retrofitting. But it's also then looking at long-term maintenance. As long as this thing is doing what we want from a stormwater point of view, so read it, right? Water drains in 48 hours. No significant scouring. All right? We've got 80% healthy swale vegetation. Right? Then you don't need to do these things. Okay? Same concept. Hardscape, right? So this is about stormwater infrastructure, so let's also look at the hardscape. Notice there's no excellent in hardscape. They just say, well, it's either, there's no excellent concrete. Concrete starts at good. I thought that was, I actually wonder if this was like, if it was intentional or just kind of a little tongue-in-cheek, but I noticed that when I look at this, I'm like, concrete isn't excellent no matter what. I thought that was kind of interesting. Sedimentation. Do you have sediment blocking 10% of the structure or 30% of the structure or 50% of the structure? So they're, again, checklists. They're just going through. Okay. Porous pavement. Again, also no excellent. It only starts at good. All right. When you get 3 inches, so here they're telling you pressure wash annually. They do a lot of pressure washing out there because they get a lot of mold. So this is Seattle, right? So if you go there, it's wet, it's moist. They actually get a lot of mold and mildew and just kind of on the top, things that we wouldn't get. So they actually do pressure washing for their maintenance, right? But if once it gets down to sidewalks 1 inch per hour or streets 3 inches per hour, then you need to increase your pressure washing. So it's the same concept. They don't just do it to do it. Okay. Other elements, look for curb and gutter blockage, look for trash. So safety is a big one. Those have to be visible. We can't have a whole bunch. I've got green infrastructure where now you can't see the fire hydrant. That doesn't work either, right? Make sure the fire hydrants are visible. Make sure that people can see around the corner. If this stuff grows crazy and you have visibility, quickest way to get sued, right, is put a whole bunch of stuff on the corner and have one traffic accident because your green infrastructure was too tall. So safety. All right. So that was what I'm going to show you next, and I don't think this printed out. And that's I talked to you at the very, very beginning of the day. But I'm going to show you kind of a list of references. So when you get this in the email, you'll have all these. LID Center, LID Urban Design Tools. US EPA's got a lot of fact sheets. So these are design tools for engineers and architects. EPA's got kind of like fact sheets to help sell this to municipalities. The Stormwater BMP database, that tells you how things work. So like, let's say you have a phosphorus problem or a nitrogen problem. This will tell you your best bet to correct that problem. So if you're targeting a specific pollutant, you want to go to the Stormwater BMP database. Seattle Public Utilities got the maintenance manual I love. Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewer District's got great green infrastructure tools for public education as well as computation of volume. Stormwater Center, these are mostly public utilities. Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, that's got the AutoCAD files you can download and retrofit locally. New York City's got their cost stuff online. I already talked to you about the WRF stormwater tools. The WRF stormwater tools, I showed you the economic WRF stormwater tool. They also have a design tool for looking at water quality volumes associated with green infrastructure. US EPA has got a great calculator now that you put in your address, your location. It looks up the soils, it looks up the rainfall, it looks up the land use cover, and then it'll tell you if you do rain gardens, here's how much water you'll keep out of the river. So it's a site design planning tool. And so US EPA, it's called the Green Values Calculator. Engineers still have to do the stormwater plan for the actual site, but that'll help for planning purposes like in a watershed scale. How much benefit we get if we do this much green infrastructure. So it can be a layered approach. You could use the EPA stormwater calculator to look at some areas, then you start drilling down some of the other things I showed you. Okay. Already talked about the Green Streets Guidebook. Download it. It's a great little manual. Already talked about the LID manual. Encourage you to download it. It's a PDF, colored. That manual, who's the audience for that manual? I guess we've actually already talked about this, but I didn't know I was going to talk about this earlier, but that's why I got this in here. Elected officials can decide what their degree of commitment is to this stuff, right? You have this stormwater manual. You can bring these things to the city council, to elected officials. What is your degree of commitment? What are you willing to do? What are you willing to experiment with? All right, great. What are you willing to implement? Are you willing to implement this swale? Or are you willing to implement porous pavement? What are you willing to do? Okay. Planning commissions. It gives examples, example codes. One of the things that's in there is an example zoning ordinance. So you can take the example zoning ordinance from SEMCOG and rewrite it for your community. We've talked a lot about how zoning doesn't allow these things. So here's a model ordinance code that you can start with to allow LID. Staff planners and planning consultants, it tells you how to educate community officials and how to suggest LID practices. For engineers and consultants, it helps us know our options. It tells us how to use calculations, and it better familiarizes us with design methods. So as an example, the rain garden, right? For the rain garden chapter of this manual, I insisted we put Darcy's Law in there because it's the only way we're going to get it right for our state. The original draft of that didn't have Darcy's Law, and it had Maryland. And I said, it won't work. So there are calculations in there for engineers, as well as information for landscape architects and developers. It was meant to be a manual for all. So that's the idea. The suggestions are there for public works. That's Grayling. That's the Grayling Rain Gardens project. So
after it was retrofitted and fixed up and actually getting it to work. There is some information in there for citizens, business owners, watershed organizations. How do you get people to do this on public property? We've Clean River Watershed Council and Huron River Watershed Council, City of Ann Arbor have had really good luck getting this stuff on private property. And then this is this is what all the chapters are, right? All the different chapters. So I'm going to jump through that. Case studies are in there, appendices. Okay. So I brought us back to within 5 minutes of schedule, but I know that Jen had some closing things she wanted to talk about as well. Any questions? I know we've thrown a lot at you for one day. Hopefully you found at least one nugget you can walk out of here with. Any questions?
I just want to thank Don and Ralph so much for hauling up here and bringing their expertise to us in northern Michigan. I certainly learned a lot today. I hope everybody else did as well. And I want to thank you guys again for coming.